Hello, I'm Mike Brown, Executive Editor of Supermarket News, and I'd like to welcome you to our podcast series, Off the Shelf with SN. In today's episode, we're joined by Mike Salguero, the founder and CEO of ButcherBox, a leading online subscription-based provider of high-quality and claims-based meats delivered to customers' doors. Mike founded ButcherBox in 2015 when he discovered that 100% grass-fed beef was extremely hard to find in the US. Mike built ButcherBox as an online butcher and retailer with a focus on making high-quality meat more accessible to all, with an emphasis on animal welfare, the environment, supporting farmers and fishermen, and social initiatives such as diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, he joins us to talk about the latest trends in the meat retail industry, as well as the impact of inflation and supply challenges, and how the meat industry is becoming more engaged with sustainability and social issues as the demand for claims-based meat continues to rise. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
I want to talk to you about the claims-based meat, which is obviously one of your focuses, but also what about the continued rise of plant-based meat alternatives? Is that something, what kind of impact are you seeing from that, and where is that whole trend headed? It's not really a trend anymore, it's an actual thing, I guess. Yeah,
it is an actual thing. I mean, in the Power of Meat report, plant-based is really still a tiny fraction of the overall meat market. And while it did have explosive growth over 2020, really it's not growing nearly as fast as it one time did. I believe that's because if you remember back in 2020, there was nothing on the shelves. And so what you saw was bison grew dramatically, lamb grew dramatically. Why did those grow? Because they're like literally the last thing on the shelf. And plant-based grew dramatically because it's one of the last things on the shelf. I'm a little worried about the plant-based market, to be perfectly honest. I think that the approach of making things that look like meat and taste like meat, but you're using monocropped soybeans and genetically modified stuff, and I don't think that's the answer. Like, I don't think it's environmentally great. We like to say that we agree with vegetarians and plant-based eaters. We actually have a lot of people who have been told by doctors that they need to eat meat, and they're like, okay, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it the most conscientious way possible. We agree that the industry needs to be fixed and that the industry is in some ways broken. Where we disagree is we're focused on the actual meat market. So I think plant-based will continue to stay. I think cultured meat is a whole other thing, which is pretty interesting. We've looked into that just to understand what's happening there. I think that's a really interesting market. One of the things that Anne Marie, who does the Power of Meat, has talked about over the past few years is the rise of the inclusion burgers. These are the burgers that are half meat, half vegetable, like mushroom. I think that's going to be really big and far bigger, I think, than plant-based. I think plant-based has a role. We are looking at providing plant-based options, although we want like real ingredients, but we're looking at plant-based options for our members because we do know that, members host others for dinner and some people don't eat meat, and that's perfectly okay. I think that's certainly not the path I've taken, but I do think I like to say that we're in alignment that the way in which animals are raised and harvested in this country needs to change.
Right. Yeah, and that brings me to my next point. ButcherBox as a specialist in claims-based meats. Honestly, that's kind of the target for a lot of the plant-based people. They're not necessarily vegetarian so much, but it's the issues around meat that bother them more. So, we've seen a rise in claims-based meats. I'm sure you have. Consumers are becoming much more engaged with sustainability issues and social issues, animal, humane treatment of animals. So, what's the impact of that on the meat industry as a whole, and obviously for ButcherBox?
Yeah, I think that the impact is that the meat industry needs to embrace this rather than fight against it. I was on a panel at the meat conference last year, and I reminded people I've gone to the meat conference year over year, and the idea of online sales was like always thought of as this super niche. We don't need to worry about online. And then the next year it was like, online's pretty interesting. And then the next year is like, online's really. And then by the time the pandemic happened, if you didn't have an online strategy as a retailer, you're in trouble. And those that had an online strategy, those that thought about the future, did incredibly well. So you saw companies such as Target just cleaning up on online grocery store sales because they prioritized it earlier than like the day the pandemic hit. I drew a parallel with that to claims-based. Like the train has left the station. The question is, are you going to keep saying, this is niche, this is super small, can't make it, can't scale it, not affordable, all the things that people say, rather than like, wow, we really need to figure this out. And that transformation is absolutely here. It's absolutely happening. And I think I'm excited that meat companies are waking up to it, retailers and meat companies, and are saying like, we need to make this a priority. I think things like Prop 12 in California and Question 3 in Massachusetts are certainly showing that there might be legal requirements to treat animals differently, if not market requirements in terms of what the customer is looking for. My biggest concern is I see a lot of corner cutting when it comes to, okay, people want this type of product. Let's like slap a label on that has a leaf and says something like all natural, which means nothing, and like call it a day. And I think that what customers actually want, what the generations, millennials and younger want, is companies that actually stand for making change. Like you want your dollars, that type of customer, including me, that's why I started the company, want my dollars to go make an impact, not just go and buy a product. And I think that requires a lot more curiosity and a lot more work than just putting on a label. And I think my hope is that grocery stores, either spend the time themselves or work with companies like ButcherBox to really bring a product, a high quality product that's raised well, better for the animal, better for the environment, better for the farmer. That they really, honor the amount of work that's needed in order to move the industry in a different direction.